Hey, this is Brooks with Character Design Forge, back with another set of critiques. This time it's Ruby, Sean, and Booplesnoop that you're going to see. Just a couple quick reminders. These are critiques that you could get yourself if you go to patreon.com/bageldenizen. Under the Novice Bard tier, one of the rewards that you get is a personalized video critique. And I've gotten a few people asking this question, and I just wanted to clarify again that these videos can be completely private and only you see them. It's just that so far the critiques that you've seen have been people that elect to have theirs visible by the public. So keeping that in mind, remember that these critiques are meant for the person that they're for, but if you see sort of some similarities in their work or things that you could work on, there's a lot to learn from watching these. And two, along with that, I've seen more of the person's work than you're necessarily seeing on screen here, and I've talked with them and see what things that they're looking to work on. So this is advice specifically for this person based on those things. And also a third thing, I'm doing these kind of off the cuff, and you see me doing some red lines and drawovers and things, and those red lines are not meant to be taken verbatim. They're just sort of a guide that I'm making as things go. Drawing and talking at the same time, you're not going to see some quality finished work from me. It's a guide. It's a mark. It's the same thing that they're doing over football plays, X's and O's. A couple things that are covered in these critiques are things like drawing poses from different angles, things like foreshortening and perspective, and also the idea of a minimum viable product or minimum viable project, especially when something in front of you seems too daunting and you just want to build momentum toward it. So all that in mind, enjoy these critiques. Hey there, Ruby. So for anyone else who might be watching, Ruby is not only a Lamb of Liberation tier patron, but she's also had a few one-on-one sessions so far, has been a big supporter on Patreon and Twitch, stuff I really appreciate. So let's see if we can't return the favor with a critique for you right now, some actionable things to look at. So right off the bat, there's a couple of images of yours that I selected, things that look pretty good for the most part. So I know that your goal at this point, what you kind of have in mind is you'd like to be doing something in the Adult Swim or Cartoon Network animation realm, creating art for that, which is really cool. Good goal to have. A couple of things to keep in mind. For one, I think the shapes that comprise your characters, and again, when it comes to these illustrations, what you have going for you is a really nice, honesty or maybe sincerity, because there's a good read, right? The characters are very sincere. The emotion of them is there, which is a hard thing to fake. It's harder to learn that than it is to learn the art fundamental stuff to get better, right? So that's the good thing. I know that one thing you're looking at doing more of is kind of the rendering and background and coloring and stuff like that. I actually really like this gradient in the hair for how simple the style is. It reads really well, so that's something I'd like to see you kind of try more stuff like that. And as far as the use of colors and shading and rendering and things like that, one thing I would just draw your attention to is this is a grayscale version of the same things, desaturated, looking at the value structure, right? So devoid of the hue of the color, just looking at it as if it was on a grayscale, how light or dark the value of your colors are. One thing I'd just be careful about, I know it's kind of a stylistic thing, but the lighter line art, right, is a very hard read when it's lighter than the color that's underneath it. So it's something that I wouldn't try and use too much of in the future, just because it's a clarity thing. I like that you have the lineless art that you've started to work on. This turned out really nice, and you just have, a couple lines that go over it. From an anatomy standpoint, and I know also perspective is something that you're hoping to work on. A couple of things that I notice, and these are just handpicked from the selection that you've provided. But you notice how, a few things are similar between all four of these. You've got pretty much a similar pose. You're looking at them, this sort of three-quarter view, right? They're all looking in the same direction. Fairly similar expression, right? And all of them the same angle, right? So you're looking at their posed the same way and the angle you're looking at them is the same way. So one thing, apart from maybe trying to add some variety to that, is the shapes almost look at times, and hands are really difficult, so this isn't really picking on you for this, but just as an example, it almost looks like maybe a silhouette of something that's interpreted, right? So it's almost as if this forearm was this black shape, and then over top of it you went, okay, so if I was going to add fingers to this, then you start doing this, right? So life drawing is one thing, and there's one more kind of exercise I'd like you to do that I'll show you after this. But one thing I'd like to see you do more of is just expression practice, right? So maybe taking one character and trying out a ton of different expressions on them, right? But then also from there, okay, so say you've got your main character doing this really angry face, right? Now take that isolated angry face and why not try and create a new character that's sort of built around the angriness, right? So you have the sort of same shapes and stuff. So now you go like with the really giant brows, maybe the eyes squint down and the face kind of, I don't know, trims in. It's a very silly idea. Maybe the mouth is really like pouty out like that. But I think it would help with kind of exploring shapes and stuff and kind of getting you into the mindset of more varied expressions and stuff. One more thing that I thought would be useful for you in terms of life drawing. So there's a website called sketchfab.com that lets you view 3D models, and it's not just pictures of the 3D models, but it's actually, you load up a model and you can rotate it in 3D space, right? So you can do this with kind of any models that you might find there. I would prefer you skew toward more realistic humans. This was just like a few seconds of searching around. I found a user named Human Engine, and he had a ton of different, both male and female human characters, different clothes and styles and stuff. This is just like a really basic female that I loaded up. And you see when you first load it up, she's just facing the camera like this. But then you can click and rotate her around. And now you've got all these kind of funky angles that you can view the model from. And so what I'd like to see you do is kind of progress and move up through these things. But if you wanted to, you could even just start here where I am with these screenshots and literally go in and start like tracing out and figuring out the 3D shapes and volume of these things, because that's what I'd like to see is more volume, and that'll help with your perspective stuff as well. So really figuring out, how this shape is comprised and everything. And then beyond that, once you're kind of comfortable with that exercise, it doesn't have to be this super, you're not getting in all the wrinkles, right? You can just kind of make a like, okay, this is an upper arm shape like that. You could just kind of make the mannequin robot shape and maybe add in and interpret where the shoulder is on the other side and come down really simple rib cage, stuff like that. Then you could go from here and then you can actually interpret what you see in the screenshot. So now down here, I'm like, okay, well, here's where the feet are. This is where they sort of land on the ground, and you go up through like that and you interpret off the screenshot, right? Because life drawing is something that's going to help you. There's a lot of different life drawing exercises. This was just one that's a little bit unorthodox that I would maybe try out. So those are a few things for you to work toward. Looking forward to see where you go next, and hopefully that's helpful. Thanks, Ruby. Okay, what's up, Boople Snoop? Thanks for being a patron. Let's see what we can do as far as finding some ways to help you improve and get where you'd like to be. I have a little bit of your art loaded in here. So one of the things that you mentioned as being a big weakness was that you wanted to be able to draw characters consistently, like the same way, which I thought was an interesting note to make. And then also your long-term goal is making cartoons and comic books and things. So one really quick thing right off the top, I like so I included this Ben 10 series here. Obviously it's fan art of some existing designs, but I like what you did here. The interpretation of it is really good. You've got this character here, which I don't think I know the names of any of these, the Ben 10 characters. But but they've got cool designs from series to series. Seeing here that there's an amount of foreshortening from the front hand to the back coming forward is nice. That's a sort of amount of perspective, right, and dimension. Perspective tends to breed dimensionality because you don't just have the flat shapes, you have shapes that are the same size but appearing separate sizes, right? It's the same idea there. And just really nice like interpretations across the board with these. Maybe one thing that I would note with this version of the character, with this one that we're highlighting, is that this foot would come up a little bit farther forward and maybe just be a little bit bigger to truly sell like that foreshortening effect, right? That's just a small thing. And so when you carry that over into the characters that you have here, a lot of, obviously this is intentional, right? These are like lineups of the characters, so you're trying to get them sort of flat in that way. But the main thing that I would note is that the shapes that you use are flat shapes in the way that there is nothing that's really telling us. For example, the fox here. With this sleeve, obviously, it's supposed to be a sleeve that's starting up here and coming up to the hand, and it's a cylinder, right? Like the way that a sleeve is or an arm is. But instead, what we're seeing, so maybe if it's in your sketch, that's one thing, but the way that you're rendering it out at the end is we're just seeing a rectangle. And some of that comes down to the level of simplification that your art has, but it also comes down to allowing things to wrap around each other. So even if you came to a point where you get to the end of the hand and there's a sleeve, right? And then the sleeve gets wrapped around by, and by sleeve, I mean an inner sleeve to a shirt. This comes down and wraps around there, and then there's at least a little bit of a curve, if that makes sense. There's just a couple things that you can do, even contour lines, right? If the arm is sticking straight out, but it's not quite this straight line, you can have the arm bend at that point, and then you have an opportunity to add wrinkles, which are their own sort of contour lines, because it's defining and telling you, hey, you see this curve here, that means that this object is round. And obviously it's not a point of people don't know what a sleeve looks like, right? It's about showing us that you know what a sleeve is supposed to look like, and things like that. So I would do some basic structural fixes, I think, or basic structural exercises when it comes to construction. Doing some things, I just gave this to another student, the idea of life drawing and in perspective, so finding poses and drawings and stuff that are done in a different perspective than what you're comfortable with. Obviously, you have this very front-facing view with some exceptions in the action poses and things, like with the fan art, which is interesting. I think I'm not sure what source you were drawing from with these. Maybe it's action poses in the show or some still images, but you see like the amount of movement there is within these compared to what is, again, I understand is just characters standing still, right? But I'd love to see some more curving motion, some more sphere shapes, and just defining those with contour lines, right? So then from like a design standpoint, I really like the color palettes that you choose, and I think this is sort of your main set of characters, right? These top four. I like the amount of work that you did to select the color palettes for each. It reads really well. In combination, sometimes combinations of colors like this blue, this yellow, this purple, this green sort of comes down to taste. So I think on an individual level, the palettes are good. One thing that I'll note here is from a design perspective, all of them are this exact same. Every head shape's about the same, every torso, and every leg shape, right? This guy's a tiny bit taller. So what happens when you sort of squint, right? Or if these were just, really, if these are all colored in shapes, is there's nothing that's differentiating them, right? And a lot too, not just the proportions, but a lot of the shapes are repeated throughout these guys. So you've got especially these two on the left, and I don't know what sort of their relationship is, or if they're brothers or antithesis type characters, like two friends that are that comes through. There's a certain amount that comes through in the storytelling. This guy appears dramatic. This guy's a little bit more maybe reserved. This character might be the worried or logical one, and this one's more on the zany side. That stuff comes through. But as far as interpreting and so a lot of I'd say basically mainly the leg and feet shapes are the ones that are repeated the most. But just looking at this and saying, okay, well, instead, what if we took the overall silhouettes of these characters and we said, okay, even with a comic or something, you say, okay, well, this character is going to be this tall, and this character is going to be this tall. This character is going to be the tallest, and then maybe this guy's really short or something like that. That's already an amount of variation, but then the kinds of shapes, the language that you use across all of them is going to be different, and that can help too. So if this guy's maintaining that same kind of skinny look, but maybe tapering out at the legs, things like that, and then your skeleton character is the skinniest and lankiest. I think there's room, especially for this guy over here, to actually be like really broader. You kind of started that. I think it'd be useful for you to try my rule of 4 exercise, not with these characters, but as an exercise where you're starting with a character, then making the opposite of that character, and then making a third that's, again, unique from the other two. And then the fourth is always the hardest, where you're not just doing opposites anymore, but you're really trying to make them as visually unique from each other as possible. I think that would help after doing that exercise. Bringing that skill back into your main cast is going to help a lot. And maybe this is too exaggerated for what you're going for, but looking at that, even with human characters, there's a lot of shape changes and variants that you can add while keeping them human or skeleton, So already, if this character was stocky and thick like this, and then you had this character next to him who's all lanky and literally bony and stuff, now we turn this off and you look at maybe just the two of them. Now there's a big difference, a big variance. So that's kind of the main idea. Hopefully that comes across even with just sort of the scribbles. And it's something that it kind of gets repeated throughout the rest of these here too. So you've got basically the same skinny, same size head, basically the same height. I would do more things like this, right? Where you've got this robot with interesting shapes. And I think sometimes the more life drawing you do, the more stuff that you draw the correct way, the more it kind of frees you up and gives you the agency and confidence to say, okay, I know the right way to do this, so I'm going to exaggerate off in this direction, right? So hopefully that is something that's helpful for you to kind of take a look at. Those are the main things that I come up with immediately. And also, I would love to see you doing, again, these are lineup type characters, but doing things where you're understanding sort of the plane, the ground plane that the character is standing on. That tends to flow through the rest of a pose if you establish that early on. Because if you knew the grid that the character was standing on first, the feet can kind of land flat on the ground. That's not a great grid. And so this foot could land here and this one could land here. And now you're thinking, okay, well, it's, there's the foreshortening happening, so this leg ends up coming up further. So obviously not something that's going to come up too much here. These feet, here's just another thing too, where this foot is pointed in this direction, but this foot is we're gonna be looking at the front of it like that. And maybe this is coming up like that a little bit more. So things like that are good to keep in mind and take a look at. Again, that first point about the shapes reading very flat, and just think of ways that you can add some depth, right? So even here, like, so it might be a stylized thing that his neck isn't showing under the, maybe he comes off as stuffy or something like that, which is good. But if the neck was showing here, then that gives you a chance to show where things are overlapping on your character. And then here, the collar in the original version is just kind of appearing behind. There's this little tangent with this part of the scarf and this part of the lapel. So something where the lapel's coming behind the scarf, you're seeing a little bit of the neck, and there's no tangent lines meeting each other. At this point now it looks layered, right? And you can have an understanding of things receding off into the distance, right? Like the actual layers of things, instead of it just being, okay, I've got a flat shape here and a flat shape here. And because in a very exaggerated way, this thing that I'm doing right now is the way that the characters read. And I'm guessing that's not what you're looking for, even if you want the intended or final style to be very simple. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that was articulated well. Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing where you go from here, because you have some good ideas, and I want to see you progress. Thanks, Boople Snoop. Hey there, Sean. Thanks for being a patron. Thanks for wanting to do this, for seeking the critique. I'm going to tell you right off the bat that this artwork it's impeccable. It's incredible. It looks amazing. Your sense of design and everything is, there's nothing that I can really tell you that's going to improve things from an artistic standpoint, because it seems to me like you started from a fine art background, right? And kind of worked this direction, which seems to be a very successful one that transitions well, because it's a much more lateral move, right, from fine art into the sort of comic and animation stylized, simplified route, because you've already got that base there. And so it seems like mainly what you're looking for isn't so much the red pen draw over type things, but really you're struggling with getting your stories out there, right? And sort of the legwork that comes with finishing something, telling stories with the characters you've made. And so I have a few things in mind for you. Just looking from the art that you have, right, what you've provided, and understanding that you have this goal of working through this Moss Rock story. I think you have a writing partner for this. The main thing that I'll maybe suggest first is the manageability of it is what's so daunting to you, and sort of what's causing you the largest amount of hesitation, I'd say. And there's ways to manage that. For one thing, I look at your feed and I see these are, I guess, 7 and a wolf of the characters from this Moss Rock story. And there are, I think, looking over my other screen, another 8, right? So that's like 15 human characters that you've sort of laid out so far, if I have that count right. And so, yeah, that might be the total amount of characters in the overall story and stuff, but I think as soon as you go down that road, it's really difficult to really get a good sense of the scope or build momentum from a place where there's 15. And maybe there's, some of them are just in a panel for one shot or something like that. And then another thing with these two is that the level of realism in them or to them is fine. I'm not saying it's impossible to create a comic with the amount of detail that you have in a lot of your work. But I will say, if you're looking to be manageable, start with something that is as simple as possible. And from a visual and artistic standpoint, I have a couple of suggestions that are just directions to go in or things to think about, not so much things I could practically, connect the dots on for you. So from a design standpoint, simplifying the artwork to a point that's what's that term? Not lowest common denominator, but like the quickest to ship. Let me look that up. That's what it is. I'm not sure why I was blanking on it. Minimum viable product. What can you get out there that's the minimum viable product? And a lot of times when we have these sacred story ideas in our head, we want to get the maximum viable product, right? The thing that's biggest, the thing that's most valuable to us because it's our baby. And if that means issue number 1 of your story, because it has to happen in the right order, is this giant detailed 16, 17 characters in it, you're never going to start there from 0. So speaking of 0, my suggestion is issue number 0, right? Some kind of side story or backstory or something that gets across the Moss Rock idea. It doesn't have to completely encompass all the aspects, but tells a smaller story about one of the characters. So for me, for instance, the comic that I'm working on right now has a total of 4 speaking characters in it. And really it's down to just 3 with just, background characters around it and stuff too. And that just keeps it simpler, right? And this is a story that takes place in what is potentially a much larger world, but I can't get to that maximum viable thing until I do this, right? And even this minimum viable product has taken me a lot longer than I thought it would. And that's just sort of the nature of these things. So that's what I would suggest for you. Just choose Jeff Boone and tell the Jeff Boone story with one other person in it or 2. It could be a single page comic. It could be a 3-page thing, maybe 10 or something. Just try and don't let the scope creep sneak up on you. And then just really briefly from the visual aspect of things, obviously the characters look really good. Even though they're all sort of in a neutral expression, there's a liveliness to them, a realness to them. So those are 2 things that I would maybe suggest for you, and something that comes, maybe more to this person who starts as a cartoonist, but not so much fine art, is push the exaggeration both in the liveliness and expression, and also in shape language. See what you can do about making them a little bit more different from each other. Obviously, you have a mood and an aesthetic that you're trying to match, but see what you can do to make the minimum viable, person or character, like from a shape language standpoint, or maybe less rendering of the hair. Maybe that's like a sacrifice you have to make. Because honestly, like there's a tweet or someone that I saw recently that was saying, like, as an illustrator looking at a comic, I used to say, oh, why'd they make this mistake? And why is there this sort of inconsistency with the character model or something like that? And then later that illustrator was making comics and then looked back on it and said, like, it was a miracle they got anything done of any quality. And that's kind of how comics end up going, right? It's not so much you can try and push to make every panel an illustration that looks perfect, but you're going to get nowhere fast with that. Just hopefully a good place for you to be, a good mindset, hopefully. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully that's helpful for you, if that was what you were looking for. And as always, again, thank you for being a patron. I really appreciate the support. Have fun creating. I look forward to seeing where you go with this. Thanks, John.